We are here in Lightroom. This image that I have up here is of a motorist in the Shangcheng district in Taipei, Taiwan when I went back in October 2025. The story behind this is that I went to this boutique shop within the Shangcheng district, which is really out of the way compared to some of the main tourist hubs within Taipei. And to get here, I had to take a bus to this district, which by all means there was not a lot of like tourists and just mainly locals within the area. And although we didn't get anything in particular from that shop because they didn't have any like Taiwan exclusive merch, what they did have in this area was some really cool street photos. So as we can see here in the top left corner, I'm going to go ahead and dissect some of my settings. But to help build the image of like what Shangcheng district is, it's a very quiet neighborhood. At least the time that I went, it was I believe during a weekday. And as we can see here after hitting I, get my little magnifying glass. After hitting I, looks like it is 1 o'clock in the afternoon over there. So by this time the sun was way overhead. It was casting a lot of sun rays into certain parts of the district, as well as it was creating harsh shadows within the buildings itself too. So that way, what I tend to find is that once I see that kind of condition where it's like sun overhead, harsh shadows, as well as really dark alleyways, I tend to just lock in. And what I love about using a 24-70mm lens in conjunction with, I think I had the R6 Mark II or the Canon R8, is that I find that 24-70 is a really good mid-ground lens to see like have a good focal length of different focal ranges and seeing what you can make with that. Because what I find to have with a 15-35 is that that's a bit too wide for me and I have to get really close to some of my subjects, whereas sometimes having a 70-200 is nice in street photography. At the same time, I feel like it draws a lot of attention and I don't want to be carrying around like a really long lens. That's why I feel like having a 24-70 is something a little bit more discreet, given how the lens is also black in color too, so it doesn't draw a lot of attention compared to something like a 70-200 where it is a wider white body lens. In terms of the settings themselves too, what I was going for is a 1/800th of a second. I was going with a higher shutter speed, so that way in case I saw any passing motorists, I can go ahead and capture some of the motion in action. And I don't have like say a blurry subject going through down the street. Additionally, I shot wide open at f2.8. I feel like I could have in retrospect shot at a higher aperture too, so that way I get a little bit more of the scene on hand, but shooting at f2.8 is pretty nice for what I was going for during this time. As for ISO, because the sunlight was so harsh, I did not want to go any higher than ISO 100, and I decided to just keep it at that. Now, in terms of how I want to go about this edit, there's a couple things I'm looking for when I'm editing in harsh light. For one, when I'm shooting for a hard light photo, I don't really mind having my photo be underexposed to begin with, because I know later on in post-processing that I'm going to go ahead and make those adjustments later on, given that I shoot my picture in RAW, which if you're not doing already, shoot your pictures in RAW so that way you have that freedom of flexibility in editing too. As for the adjustments within hard light photos, I like to still underexpose my image so that way I can go ahead and remove a lot of the distractions surrounding my motorists, and additionally focus on really the colors within the scene itself. What I notice with harsh light photos is that they also tend to wash out the colors because the sunlight's so harsh. And another way of thinking about it is that it desaturates colors too. So we're going to bring a little bit more of that color saturation within certain parts of the color palette back more to life and make them a little bit more prominent too. Now when I saw this, I thought it like I was in a little bit of a movie. So I'm going to go ahead and hit R on my keyboard. And what I like to do is I like to edit it for a 16:9 kind of frame and frame it up in such a way where now I'm keeping my subject still center focused, as centered as possible. And that helps reduce the amount of, I would say clutter within the frame itself. And now I can go ahead and start focusing on what I want to go ahead and edit on. In terms of my editing, I like to go with a click on my white balance, because here we have a couple spots where we can go ahead and make use of this tool. When we're picking for different colors, it's asking you to pick something that's typically white, so that way it can adjust for the other colors within the scene as well. We have a couple areas that we can look for. I have this white wall over here, which helps, I'd say, yeah, it helps increase the warmth within the image itself. I find that a little bit too warm, so I'm going to go on to some other parts of the frame itself Now when using this color picker, just be very mindful of like what aspects of the different elements within a frame are white. So you can pick like say a license plate, you can pick a white wall, and it's okay to go ahead and sample from different areas. So I picked multiple different colors within the sign itself, and I find that this color scheme works pretty well so far, so I'll just keep it like that. And what I should mention when it comes to white balance is that, and like with any other kind of edit too as we make along the way, is that they're not all going to be set in stone, but by having a good base of like where you want to go ahead and take your edit from as a starting point, try to get as close as possible to where you want it to be at, because that will make editing for other things so much easier. And because we're editing warmer tones in this picture to help accentuate some of the warm tones within the overall scene itself, that will help make our editing life so much easier. Now in terms of our basic exposure, I like to go ahead and further, like I mentioned, drop my exposure. So we're gonna go ahead and drop that a little bit more. And if you know me, you know I like to edit within like minus like 1s or like 5s or even multiples of 10, because I find that a lot easier versus like going something like arbitrary, like say, I don't know, like 27 or something. I find that just works with my editing style, because now it's just a really easy way of just going ahead and taking into account how much I'm editing at a time. Now I think by exposing it by at least half a stop, I could do a little bit more, because again I want to remove a little bit more of the distractions around my rider, and also remove the distractions within the alleyway itself too, to help simplify my image. So I think going a little bit more crazier with it, like a -80, would actually work really well. In terms of the contrast, we'll go ahead and adjust that for taste later on. As for highlights, because we have reduced the exposure, that also means that not only do we remove a little bit more of the distracting elements in the background too, and have our motorist be the focal point of our image, I do want to go ahead and drop the highlights, because I feel like they're still a little bit too strong, especially not only on the rider itself, but for the roof as well as the white wall too. Now dropping it to, I'd say -18 is a really good start, but because I like to have multiples of 5s or 10s within my editing workflow, because it's so much simpler, at least in my mind, I will go -20. As for shadows, what we can see here before I get deeper into this edit is that we have heavily underexposed this image. I'm going to go ahead and continue to go ahead with the same thing, drop it down by a little bit more. I'd say -18 is alright, because again, we just want our focal point to be the main subject of the photo, and just remove any other distracting elements that don't help make the scene stand out. As for whites, very similarly to highlights, I want to go ahead and just drop that a little bit more, so that way they're not going to be as strong. As for the blacks, I think that we can go ahead and crush them a little bit more too. I'm going to go -10 on this. So even after making these, say like 5 adjustments, in addition to how we shot it, here's the before, here is the after. So we have what I would say is a really good baseline, just making the start of a hard light image. As for texture, clarity, and present dehaze, we're going to leave that alone for a little bit. Tone curves was something that I feel like was absolutely necessary to learn earlier on, but I feel like a really good start for especially photographers who are beginning to edit is going to work with the tonal contrast or the tonal curve versus like the red, greens, and blues, because I'd say sometimes having too much control and creative freedom with your colors, you can get lost with your editing if you're not just familiar with how to use a tool. So to that point, simpler the better, and much more effective. When it comes to my tone curve itself, what I like to do is I always like to include a little bit of a fade, because I think it's a little bit of a movie scene when I edit for that, especially like the really old 2000s ones. Now, when editing for the tone curve too, as you can see by lifting up the blacks, that's also helped increase, not necessarily the exposure, but you can see a little bit more detail versus like when the blacks are crushed. But I like to go ahead and add a couple more points within my shadows as well as my highlights. So right where they intersect as well, and I can go ahead and make those 3 points. Again, we're going to add a little bit more points along the way too, but at least with where we're at, I do want to keep the theme going with crushing the blacks even a little bit more in the shadows, so that way we can remove some more distractions. And what we're going to do is that we're going to make a little bit of an S-curve. So even though I've reduced the highlights over here within the basic exposure panel, adjusting for the highlights is going to be a little bit more different within the tone curve itself, whereas you have so much more range of how you want to adjust within the tone curve, Whereas with the highlights, shadows, as well as the other sliders within the tone curve itself, you have a very finite range. So as you can see here, for example, I go minus 100. Now there's only so much that I can go ahead and adjust for. I'm going to Control Z that to go ahead and go back to my original setting. Whereas with this tonal range over here, I have not only this high of a highlight, but I can go even lower too, but that start to look really funky. I'm going to go ahead and Control Z, and as you can see, as I was adjusting it up and down, I was holding Shift as I was clicking it and adjusting it, so that way I can only adjust within that vertical column too, and to be much more precise with my editing. Contrary to lifting up the blacks, I'm going to reduce the whites over here because I find that is a really good complement of not only making the whites and highlights a little bit duller, but it kind of goes with the theme of like something a little bit or like more retro and vintagey and like old school instead of something like so clean. But with where we're at right now, I think having the tone curve where it is good. I will add another point in the shadows over here because I think that we can really drop that even further and really bring out a little bit more color within his shirt while continuing to remove distractions within the frame itself. Now, as we can see here, we are getting, I would say, closer to how I would want to keep this image as it is, because now we're focusing on keeping the color within the blue, that being the most prominent and bright color, having the most importance within the frame. Plus, having that really nice line cut across the eye like that just looks really cool. Additionally, we have reduced the amount of distractions within the frame itself. So if I go before and after, here's a before. You can see a little bit more details within the shadows as well as the blacks, but now going into the after, we've just really reduced the amount of fixtures in a way, even though they're still there, and just made our focal point be the most prominent thing within the hierarchy of things. As for my final point over here, I'm going to go ahead and kind of complete the S-curve a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit more brightness to the midtones of the image and give that a little bit more personality as well as contrast. So I think that's going to be a good baseline for what it is. As for color calibration, color is going to be a really important subject here as we continue on with the edit, and here's a couple ways that I like to go ahead about it. Calibration, go ahead and create a baseline color, so that way when it comes to the color mixers, I like to homogenize the colors later on or make them distinct from each other depending on which colors I find to be the most prominent or even the most what I'd say important in help depicting what the scene is. In terms of red primary and shifting back and forth, I kind of like going a little bit more towards the left hand side of the frame because now we're going into, I wouldn't say magentas of the color palette, but given the skin tone and like how the, I'd say, warmer colors are hitting the, I would say, loose paper or signage, better put, I think that complements it really well, whereas having it a bit too orange kind of makes it a little bit too yellow for my taste. So I think having it between like a -10 or like a -15 works really well. In terms of green primary, I like to go ahead and shift this back and forth a little bit, and I like how the greens are looking, especially on this roof right over here. It makes like a really nice green rectangle. It helps add like kind of like a overall frame to the image. So the green roof with the telephone pole or even the light post, as well as how the light is hitting our subject, creates this nice little box to help frame our subject. As for the blue primary, this right here is where I find a little bit more of the magic to be made once editing for red and greens. And because I'm editing top to bottom, doesn't mean that you have to edit that way too. That's what I find works with my editing workflow. And by editing the blue primary last, I tend to find that now it helps set up the rest of the frame for the colors that I want it to be at. So I find that a little bit more towards the teal side is a bit too much, so I think scaling it back to -10 would actually work really well. Again, we're going to be adjusting some of these colors a little bit later on too. In terms of saturation, I don't mind having the colors being a little bit more poppy in this image. Going -5 to begin with, because we are still going to adjust the colors later on, is what I like to go for. Additionally, when it comes to the green primary, I think going a little bit more like -12 would be nice. Shooting in hard light conditions will wash out your colors, but at the same time, like, I don't want to have my colors be so punchy to know they are taking more attention away from like the other things that are going on within the frame as well. As for the blue primary, I'm going to go ahead and desaturate that just ever so slightly. because we are going to work with those colors later on too. In terms of the colors themselves, I'm going to be working with hue, saturation, and luminance. Hue going on first. I find that homogenizing my colors is very important within my workflow, so I'm going to go ahead and push the reds towards the right. I find that works really well because there are reds within the skin tones, as well as some of this signage that's floating in the wind over here. Mine plus 20 would work well, or plus 15. In terms of the oranges, pushing them toward the reds would make actually the skin tones a little bit more red, which I don't really like all too much. I'm going to go ahead and push the oranges a little bit towards the yellows, or yellows a little bit more towards the oranges. And what that will adjust is not only for the signage, but with the skin tones as well. Now, when it comes to skin tones, I like to make them as accurate as possible to how I perceived it, or just alter them slightly. Just in case that, because every camera and lens is going to interpret color differently. That's where I find that color calibration can really help set the tone for things. Adjusting for red, orange, and yellow skin tones, or orange, these tones within the skin itself, I find that usually those three, especially oranges and yellows, are kind of like the culprit of like when it comes to editing for skin tones as well. You don't necessarily need tone curves to edit for the skin tones, but they do help out as well. But at least for this example, we're going to make things really simple. As for greens, we're going to go ahead and push out the greens a little bit more towards like the teals, or maybe I think it's aqua, depending on how like some cameras interpret it. As for the aquas themselves, we're going to go ahead and push those out a little bit more to the green, so that way I feel like they accurately represent how I saw the sign, and kind of make the green a little bit more distinct. As for blues over here, I don't want to push it towards the purples because that can do a variety of things. And as we push out the blues towards the purples, it's editing in a funky kind of way. And what I tend to find, sometimes blues can be misinterpreted as purples and vice versa. For the most part, push blues over to the teals because I really like that color scheme and how it contrasts really well with some of the warmer tones. As for the purples themselves, I will push that out a little bit more towards the blue, because I find that kind of having purple within the image itself kind of makes it a little bit weird. In terms of luminance, I want to go here because as we're editing in hard light, a lot of colors are going to be much brighter than others, which I want to scale back a little bit. In terms of saturation, I will saturate these colors individually, but I do want to work on luminance a little bit. What I do want to edit for is particularly green and blue. Green because, one, it's washed out by the sunlight, and I find that by reducing the greens, I can go ahead and continue to make my focal point, that being my motorist, the most prominent thing in my image. As for the blues, I feel like they're a bit too strong, so I'm going to go ahead and reduce that just a little bit. As for saturation, I'm going to go ahead and just keep some things as they are, but particularly I'm going to go ahead and push out a little bit more of the greens because, as I mentioned earlier on, when it comes to editing in hard light and shooting from hard light, is that sun rays will tend to wash out your colors quite heavily. But we can go about it in a couple ways. I can really push that color out and make that much more vibrant too, but I rather go with something a little bit more or old school or vintage, and I can achieve that going by more desaturation than anything. As well as the blues, I feel like they're a little bit too strong for my liking, so having them desaturated to like about a -25 or -20 would work really well. As for aquas, very similar story. I feel like that's a little bit too strong for my taste, so I'm going to go ahead and reduce that as well. As for the oranges and yellows, I think that we can go ahead and play around with it a little bit more too and reduce that ever so slightly by 5, because any more and I'm going to be taking away a lot of the color within the image itself. So having it -5 or even -4 for that matter is going to work really well. In terms of the color grading and the split toning over here, when it comes to split toning, you can do this in a couple ways. Certain parts of your shadows or highlights contrast really well with each other and make a really nice complement together and a really good palette. Otherwise, you can use them in conjunction with each other to really accentuate and sometimes make a more monochromatic image. But in this image, we're not making it monochromatic because we have so many other colors going on. What I'm going to do with color grading is really accentuate all the warm tones within my image itself, because not only do I interpret it as like more of a warmer kind of image, or in just being there too, but I feel like we can definitely play with the warmer tones within the skin tones as well as the shadows as well, and including the highlights. In terms of the midtones, that's the areas between the blacks, shadows, whites, and highlights, and I find that in my experience in editing, -45 is going to be a really good middle ground because it's not like a gold, it's not too yellow, it's not too orange, but I feel like it's a nice blend between the two different colors of yellow and oranges. I'm gonna go for plus 15 over here, or plus 14. Definitely warms up the image rather greatly. And we can see here by doing a before and after on it, or better put, hitting this little eye icon over here, we see a lot of the coolness within the shadows itself. We have warmed up our image quite a bit. It's most noticeable within the roofing over here, but we're going to continue to accentuate some of the warmth within the rest of the image itself. So I kind of like to go 45 as well, kind of to match the image itself. And this time around, I'm going to go plus 10. I don't want to get too crazy with it because we are in a way doing math when it comes to adding up all these numerical values with each other. And by adding too much all at once, we can begin to get more of like a, I would say like Fanta washed kind of image where like everything's really orange, but we want to do it in such a way where not only is it subtle, but it works really well with some of the other tools that we have on hand. As for the shadows themselves, I want to accentuate that ever so slightly too, because we have a lot of shadows and blacks going on within the image. So having something where if I start to go a little bit too crazy with it, 59 or above, like I will start to get a lot of orange within my frame. So having something to help accentuate how warm the image is, plus 5 is what I think works really well. Gonna hit it before, gonna hit an after, and we've already done so much to this image too. It was definitely washed out. It was too bright in certain areas, and we have a lot of distractions to take our eye away from what really matters in the center frame. Now that I look about it, I think that we've added a little bit too much in terms of the warmth in certain areas. So I'm going to scale back ever so slightly on a couple areas, so that way we're not going to get a little too crazy with our editing. Editing in 5s or multiples of 10 was what I find to be really easy, and something that that works really well with my editing, because I find that is a really good baseline to see incrementally how much an image will change through each adjustment. As for blending and balance, we're just going to leave them alone so far. As for sharpening, we don't really have anything to sharpen. I want to go with a little bit more of a grunge kind of look to it. Something that's a little bit more rough around the edges, which we can definitely address. In terms of transformation, what I always like to do is, and I'm a little bit of a neat freak in this respect, I always like to constrain my crop and then level my image. I find that leveling things just helps create a nice horizontal baseline for everything. In terms of effects, we're going to go ahead and drop the vignetting, and that helps us remove a lot of the distractions. And as you can see here, now we have so much more that we're removing relative to how we had in the beginning. So a lot of the corners start to pull in, draw more of your focus of the eye towards the center frame itself. And as for the grain, I find that a lot of the magic comes from this slider in particular. I find that having at least 30 grain or even like 40 grain works really well. But I'm also going to increase the size of it because I like to have more grain, or make that much more of a prominent thing. And I like to have it be a little bit more rough this time around. So we're going to go with plus 60 instead of 10 plus, more than we had at 50. And I feel like this really helps set the atmosphere of like something that I would see like maybe a Quentin Tarantino movie, especially like in his earlier works. And that's kind of like the mood or feeling that I'm going for when editing for this kind of like hard light kind of situation, especially given the facial feature, and we can see this man and how he's reacting. I will admit, when I took this photo, I thought he was gonna like step off his bike and confront me, but he just zoomed off and carried on with his business, and I was like, oh, thank goodness. Further adjustments from here on out. There's a couple things that I want to do to like add a cherry on top, and that being the presence. So we're gonna go ahead and I would say add a little bit more dehaze, because I find that adds a little bit more contrast. Also helps crush the blacks even further and just remove any of like the hazy atmosphere within the scene itself. Clarity, because we are going for a little bit more rough texture, we're going to go ahead and reduce the clarity itself to make the look a little bit softer, because I also don't want the image to be too perfect, and given how clean and sharp the RF glass is. In terms of parametric curve, like I mentioned earlier on, we can go back to some of these curves as well as other editing tools after we make our adjustments to the overall image itself. I do want to go a little bit more softer on the tone itself. The reason why I'm going for a softer look on this kind of shot is because I actually missed my focus a little bit later on. I'm also going to decrease the darks too. I missed a little bit more of my focus, so when I zoom in, his face was actually not in focus as I wanted to, which I was totally alright with. I feel like when it comes to shooting for photos, I try to keep my photos as tack sharp as possible, but sometimes I feel like even for shooting for scenes that aren't as perfect can really make for something like have more personality in it. Because it gives off a certain kind of look, and I'm totally okay with that because I've edited it in such a way where now I'm very much content with how it looks even better than it was before. In terms of vibrance and saturation, adding vibrance is going to affect more of the midtones globally of the image, so I really like to push those out a little bit more in this instance, and I find that plus 50 actually works really well. Or maybe even plus 40. Actually, no, we're going to keep it at plus 50. Reason why I keep it at that, because I think that it helps really push out some of the colors within the overall frame itself and just make our rider even more prominent and adjacent to some of the warmer tones and cooler tones within the image. But at the same time, we're also going to drop the saturation within the frame itself. I think minus 10 would work okay with this, and that does look pretty good to me. As for a final touch, we're going to add some masking to it. So I'm going to go ahead and hit M because that's going to go ahead and get me a linear gradient. I like to pull from the bottom to the left hand side because looking at how the light is hitting, and we can hit O to see what is going to be affected and what's not going to be affected. So everything in this deep dark red area is going to be hit with 100% of the adjustment. Additionally, as we pull it further out, we see that the effects of the linear gradient tend to diminish. But after hitting O, I do want to drop the exposure a little bit more. I think minus 35 would work really well. And we're going to make a little bit of a sandwich going from here on out. So that way we can keep our subject being the main focus of our image. I'm going to push it out by grabbing the linear gradient from the middle and then going ahead and pulling that out even further. Because I've already done so many adjustments to this image, I'm going to hit O again so that way I know as I'm decreasing the exposure, I can clearly see what's going on, because as I decrease the exposure while I have the red going on, it can be hard to see. So we're going to drop this down ever so slightly by a little bit more. I think actually minus 0.5 is going to be good, half a stop. But yeah, with that in mind, I have took this image from this washed out bright image, very much a lot of distractions going on, to something where now I'm really focusing on the facial expression and the colors and just removing a lot of distractions when it comes to the hard light. So to achieve this, like I mentioned earlier, team, what we want to do is that we want to go ahead and, for the most part, underexpose the image and then use masking tools as well as the basic exposure panel to go ahead and decrease not only the shadows as well as the blacks, but we want to balance it out too with the highlights as well as the whites, so that way they're not as blown out, because when we start to decrease certain elements, we may keep things in a way looking more saturated than they actually are, even though we didn't touch them. So that's why we have balance within our whites as well as highlights. In terms of colors, we have simplified our color palette greatly, not only by decreasing the amount of exposure, but by homogenizing some of the colors and making certain colors within the frame much more prominent, or even have a little bit more of a weathered kind of look, to go for more of that like straight kind of like grungy and like imperfect kind of look to it. And as for the colors themselves, I am left with more green, with really three simple colors: greens, blues, as well as more of the warmer tones like the yellows and the oranges, but they kind of like mixed in with each other a little bit thanks to HSL. So yeah, with all that in mind, hope you guys liked the video and enjoy it. If you want to see more editing videos, please let me know what you want me to edit next. And until then, I will catch you guys in the next video. If you haven't seen my video about how to go for a 90s neon soul kind of look, or my style video, I will drop that in the end card right over here. And until next time, I'll catch you around. Peace out.